My presentation is on environmental injustice and religion in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is the table of contents. We're going to talk about the issues and the research methods and then the results. So this journal article is about how religion plays a role in environmental injustice, specifically in Salt Lake City, Utah. Results show that systemic white privilege oppresses minority groups such that they experience air pollution disparities. First, we'll talk about why this topic is important, the issue itself, and the context of the problem. So air pollution is a big issue as 7 million deaths per year, or 13% of total deaths, are attributed to air pollution. Some of the factors that made air pollution worse in Salt Lake City are population growth, urban industrial expansion, and heavy automobile reliance. And it certainly does not help that the city is located in a high mountain valley that creates poor physical geographic conditions for dispersion. Now we'll look at how religion plays in a role in environmental injustice. So the Mormon Church exerts great political and economic power in Salt Lake City. Church members are a majority on most local governmental councils and in the Utah State Legislature. The church is also an enormous economic force, controlling many financial assets. The Mormon Church can also shape local public opinions through newspaper and other media outlets it operates. Religion plays a huge role in geographic isolation of Mormons because homogeneous settlements was central to the utopian vision of Mormonism. Next, we'll talk about the research questions and methods. These are the three research questions. First is, are levels of air pollution distributed inequitably with respect to Mormon prevalence? Second is, are levels of air pollution distributed inequitably with respect to race and socioeconomic composition? And the third is, does Mormon prevalence affect the association between racial composition and air pollution? We'll now take a look at the dependent variables, which is cancer risk, respiratory hazard, diesel particulate matter hazard, PM2.5, O3 concentration, traffic proximity, and proximity to risk management plan facilities. These are all indicators of how severe air pollution is. And now we'll take a look at the distribution of these variables. So notice that the highest cancer risk, DPM hazard, respiratory hazard, PM2.5 concentration, traffic, all that, they're all located in the center of the valley floor where they are the most severe. I did not include all the graphs for the dependent variables, but they all look very similar to the ones shown here. The highest risk are located in the center of the valley floor. And now we'll look at the explanatory variables. Mormon prevalence, proportion of whites, Hispanics, Blacks, Asians, Pacific Islanders, etc. Median household income, population density, gender, and so on. Now we'll look at the distribution of these variables. So the figure on the left indicates Mormon prevalence in Salt Lake City. The title says 15-year child-woman ratio. This is what the researchers used to calculate Mormon prevalence, but I won't dive into that. And the figure on the right shows the proportion of white people in Salt Lake City. Notice that the areas with the most concentration for Mormons and white people are located outside of the valley floor. Now we'll look at the distribution of minority population in Salt Lake City. The areas with the most concentration for minority groups are located in the center of the valley floor, where air pollution is most severe. The last graph on the bottom right shows the distribution of household income where the darker colored areas indicate higher income. So this paper uses GEE, generalized estimating equations, to make their model. It's basically a method of regression, but the assumptions are less strict than the traditional regression models. The model shows that higher Mormon prevalence and proportion of whites are associated with lower air pollution levels. Higher population density and proportion of POC are associated with higher air pollution levels. Lower income is associated with increased PM 2.5 concentration. And more results, higher proportion of whites is associated with significantly less traffic-related risk, whereas urban location and proportion of Hispanics are associated with significantly more. Higher proportion of Black people and Pacific Islanders are associated with significantly greater risks, so higher proximity to RMP facilities. The Mormon prevalence variable and race or ethnicity variables have the largest effects on air pollution risk. Next, we'll take a look at the results from the GEE interaction model, which examines the Mormon prevalence as a modifier of the effects of the proportion white and proportion Hispanic variables on levels of air pollution. The graph on the left shows that a higher proportion of white residents significantly decreases the proximity to risk management plan facilities under conditions of high Mormon prevalence. The graph on the right shows that although with higher proportion of Hispanic or Latino residents have significantly higher levels of PM 2.5 concentration overall, associations are weaker under conditions of high Mormon prevalence. Finally, we answered the research questions. So the first question was, are levels of air pollution distributed inequitably with respect to Mormon prevalence? The answer is yes. Mormons are politically, economically, and culturally dominant in Salt Lake City, and the findings indicate that their collective social power might afford them greater relative safety from outdoor air pollution. The second question was, are levels of air pollution distributed inequitably with respect to racial or ethnic and socioeconomic composition? The answer is yes. Whiteness strongly influences lower neighborhood level exposure to air pollution, and whereas Hispanic, Latino, Black, and Pacific Islander status strongly influence higher levels of air pollution. The third question was, does Mormon prevalence affect the association between racial composition and air pollution? We don't have actually enough evidence from this paper to say that's a definite yes, but Mormon prevalence to some degree modifies the effect of Hispanic neighborhood composition as seen in the interaction model earlier. And thanks for listening. That's my presentation.